Good morning and happy Easter. If I were to tell you that I had an Easter egg in this box, would you believe me? Well, would you believe me if I showed you something that might look a little bit like an Easter egg? Well, you can believe me because here I have in my hands a brand new dairy milk Easter egg. Now, before you saw this, did you believe that I had an Easter egg in this box? You heard that I had it, but you hadn't seen it yet, and so maybe you didn't believe. When we see something, we believe it. Now, I can assure you there's no trickery with the live stream. I do indeed hold in my hand a real Cadbury's Easter egg. Plenty of other makes of Easter egg are available as well. Seeing is believing. You've seen the Easter egg and you believe that I've got an Easter egg here. And we are going to look at something far more exciting than an Easter egg. Easter might be about Easter eggs, but it's about far more exciting things than simply an egg. We're going to think back to that very first Easter Sunday morning when some people saw something and they believed because they'd seen it, and it was much greater than any Easter egg. So are you going to listen in? Are you going to follow along in this story to see what happened on that very first Easter morning? It's a true story that's been written down by a man called John. And we're going to look in that chapter 20, and we're going to act out some of the story. So in your homes, maybe you've prepared your home in advance. There was that Easter Sunday challenge that came out on the Friday email about building a den, building a tomb in a part of your house. Maybe getting a teddy wrapped up in toilet roll so you can act out a bit of that story. Feel free to sit and watch. You don't have to act it out, but this may help you as you watch and as we think through what happened on that very first Easter Sunday. John chapter 20, we're going to see what they saw and what they believed. Okay, are you ready? The story starts early on that first Easter Sunday morning. It's cold and it's dark, and Mary is on her way to the tomb. So I should warn you as well, there are going to be a few characters in this story. There's Mary, a friend of Jesus who knew Jesus, who saw Jesus die, who saw Jesus buried, who saw Jesus put in that tomb, and the stone rolled in front of the tomb. There's Mary, one character. There's Simon Peter, another close friend of Jesus. And there's John, the man who wrote this particular account of what happened. So think who's going to act who. Okay, so Mary, she's coming along to the tomb. It's cold and it's dark. She knows where it is. And Mary is crying. Okay, so other Marys at home crying. And in verse 1 of John's account, it says this: Mary went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. That's the first thing that she saw on this first Easter Sunday morning. The tomb, the stone in front of the tomb had been removed. The tomb was open. That wasn't supposed to happen. You keep the stone in front to protect the body and so that the smell doesn't come out of that tomb. And so Mary panics. She thinks that the body's been stolen. It's been taken away. So she runs all the way back to the other disciples to tell them. So, Mary's, off you go. Have a run. Maybe run to the end of your garden and back. Maybe run to the top of your stairs and back. Have a little run. You're going to tell the other disciples what you've seen. And while we wait for the Marys to have a little run and go and tell the disciples, if you're still sitting in front of the screen watching this, I've got something for you guys to think and look at. Why not have a look through chapter 20? This is John chapter 20. That's the story we're looking at. So grab a Bible and have a look for the number of times that John writes the word saw. Okay? So he saw, She saw. That's an important word in John's account. So have a little look through those verses and count how many times John writes the word saw. And you can do that while we're waiting for the Marys to come back. Okay, that's probably enough time. So, Mary's reached the other disciples. Obviously, the story is speeded up in real time. That would have taken longer. The tomb wasn't that close to the other disciples. And Mary tells Simon, Peter, and John. This is what she's going to tell them. And remember, you've been running, so you're breathless. And she tells them that they've taken the Lord out of the tomb. Now, Simon, Peter, and John, and Mary, you're going to need to go for a run now. But before you go, I need to tell you who's going to win this run, okay? It's not the fastest runner amongst you. It's the one that I say is going to win, or rather the one that John says in his account, okay? So Simon Peter's going to start running, but then John's the quicker runner, so he's going to overtake Simon Peter. And Mary's also going to run. And it doesn't really matter where Mary comes, although she probably doesn't get there ahead of John. So now, off you go. You're running to the tomb. So while the Marys and the Simon Peters and the Johns are running to the tomb to see what's there and what Mary saw earlier, if you're still sitting watching this and you're not running, then here's something for you to have a think about. Have a look at chapter 20 of John's Gospel, verses 5, 6, and 7. And there, John in his account spends a little bit of time telling us about those linen cloths and the face cloth that wrapped up Jesus' body and explaining what they saw in the tomb. So have a think about what they saw and why John might be particularly focusing in on that. You can think about that while the Marys and the Simon Peters and the Johns are running to the tomb. I think we've probably given them enough time to get there. So John's definitely got there. John's the fast runner. He has overtaken Peter. He gets to the tomb, and he stops there at the tomb. He stays outside the tomb. But Simon Peter gets to the tomb and goes straight in. He's not going to stop. He wants to go in and see what's happened. And these two men see something very strange. This is verse 6 in John's account. They saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. Now that is very strange. And to help us understand why that's strange, I want you guys to act out something else, okay? So this next part is not part of John's account. It's not part of any other account. So it's not part of the Bible's story. But I want you to act it out to see if this was possible, okay? So you're going to change roles here, and you're going to imagine that you are people who have been sent by the Jewish leaders to steal Jesus' body, okay? You're some people who've been sent by the Jewish leaders to steal Jesus' body at night. Now, this is not written about in any Bible account. So John's not saying that happened. But I want us to act it out to see if it might have been possible. Okay? So you're changing roles now. So imagine it's the dead of night. It's dark. And you're creeping up slowly towards the tomb, and you're peering around because you don't want anyone to see what you're doing, because what you're doing you shouldn't be doing. You don't go and steal the bodies of dead people. And then you get to the tomb and you think, oh no, I've forgotten about that huge stone that was rolled in front of the tomb. I've got to go back and find some more people to help me move that big stone. So you go quickly get some more people, and you come back and you're creeping up again towards the tomb, and it's dark, and you're peering around to check that no one's seeing you. And you go up to this huge stone that's in front of the tomb, and you're rolling it, and you're trying to heave it back from the entrance to the tomb. And then you peer inside, and it takes a little bit of time for your eyes to get used to the darkness inside the tomb. And you look in there, and you see this body, and you quickly go up to the body. One of you takes the legs, one of you takes the arms, one of you takes the waist. And then run as quick as you can with this body away from the tomb, okay? That's what you've been pretending to do. Now, I want us to read what John said happened. So this is John chapter 20, verses 6 and 7. This is from the ESV translation, a more word-for-word translation. And I want you to think whether it sounds like Jesus' body was stolen or not, okay? Then Simon Peter came following John, and went into the tomb. And he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Okay? So the linen cloth was lying there, and the face cloth that had been around Jesus' head was folded up in a place by itself where Jesus' head had been lying in the tomb. Now, let me ask you, those of you who've just acted out imagining if Jesus' body had been stolen from the tomb, where's your toilet roll? Where's what was wrapped around the face of the teddy? Is it back in the tomb? Is it neatly folded up where Jesus' head would have been lying in the tomb? No. I'm assuming if you've stolen a teddy or a small child wrapped up in toilet roll, then you've taken that whole body with the toilet roll. You didn't stop to slowly unwrap it and put it back in its place and slowly unwrap the face cloth and neatly fold it up, put it back in its place. You were doing something that was wrong, and you were stealing, and you were doing it at night where no one was looking. You're doing it as quickly as possible, and you just grabbed it and ran, and you didn't care about any linen cloths. So what John is saying and writing here, the things that he saw with his own eyes, he is trying to say that it wasn't possible for Jesus' body to have been stolen. So why don't you, if you've just acted that out, why don't you unwrap the toilet roll from the teddy, and why don't you place it back in your tomb? You don't have to be OCD about it, but you can put it where Jesus' body would have been, neatly placed there. Because Jesus would have risen and unwrapped it and put it back there, because his body wasn't stolen. And then let's have a look at verse 8 to see what happens next. So this is John chapter 20, verse 8. John now steps inside the tomb, and he's seen that the stone's been rolled away, and now he sees the linen strips and the face cloth folded up. He sees that Jesus' body has gone, and he believes. Do you see that? John sees and believes. And you know what he believed? He believed that Jesus is alive. And that is the fantastic news of Easter Sunday. Simon and Peter have gone back to where they were staying, but Mary is staying at the tomb, and she's crying. And she now looks into the tomb to see what's there. And what does she see? Verse 12. Have a look at that. Mary saw two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been. Now that is very strange. Not just strange, but supernatural. Some angels that have come not from earth, but from heaven, are now at this scene. And you'd think Mary would get it after what she's seen, but she still doesn't know exactly what has happened. And so she says to the angels, "They've taken my Lord away." She thinks someone's stolen Jesus' body. Then have a look at verse 14. Who does she see next? She turned round and saw with her very own eyes. In John's account, Mary, the first person to see the risen Lord Jesus. Jesus standing there alive, not dead. She still hasn't yet got it. She hasn't recognized this as Jesus. She thinks that he's a gardener, and so she asks him, "Sir, tell me where you've put him." And she starts crying again. And so Jesus says, "Mary." And Mary turns to him and cries out, "Teacher." Now she sees him and she knows this is Jesus. You're alive. You're not dead. You're there right in front of me. I can see you with my own eyes. Mary's cries have turned to cheers, and she rushes to Jesus. But Jesus says, "Don't cling to me, Mary. Go and tell the others." So she runs again. Mary is off running again. So if you're Mary, here you go. This is your exercise for the day. You're running again to tell the others that you're not crying this time. You're cheering because Jesus, you've seen him with your own eyes. He's alive. He's not dead. He's been resurrected. And when she gets back to the others, she tells them, verse 18, "I have seen the Lord." I have seen the Lord. Mary, with her own eyes, saw Jesus alive. And all the way through John's account, John chapter 20, we see these words, she saw, he saw. He saw and believed. And then after the verses that we've been looking at, then we see Jesus appearing to the 10 disciples. They saw Jesus. And then Jesus appearing to the disciples plus Thomas, who hadn't been there the first time. And he sees and he believes. And he cries out, "My Lord and my God." These people who see and who believe. The question is, what about us? What about you and me? Because we weren't there. This happened a long time ago. John is saying this is true, but it happened a long time ago. And I haven't seen Jesus alive. I haven't seen these angels. I haven't seen this empty tomb. So can we believe if we haven't seen? Well, John wants us to know that you don't have to see to believe. You can also hear to believe. You see, those first eyewitnesses, Mary and Simon Peter and John and the other disciples, and then many more who also saw Jesus, they saw and believed and then wrote down the story so that we can hear and believe. We haven't seen, but we've heard. Maybe it's a bit like this. I said earlier that I had a Cadbury's Easter egg in here, and you saw it. You saw and believed. But what if I were to tell you that in this box I have a Cadbury's chocolate caramel bar? You can't see it. And so maybe you think, well, I'm not going to believe that. But maybe you think, well, Tom's seen that Cadbury's caramel bar. I trust Tom, and therefore I haven't seen it, but I've heard it, and therefore I'm going to believe. You see, we don't have to see something to believe it. There are plenty of things that we don't see, but we hear about. And if we trust the person that we hear it from, then we too can believe. The question is, do we trust those first people, those eyewitnesses, those ones who saw and believed? They saw that Jesus is alive, and they believed that he is their Lord and their God. And that's why Easter is so exciting. Easter eggs are nice and they're tasty, but it's about so much more than that. It's about the fact that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, that he showed that death couldn't hold him, that he showed that he is king over all. He showed that his death really did work. It really did pay for sins, as he said. His rising again showed that he is alive now, and we can go to be with him forever. That is why Easter is so exciting, because Jesus is alive. Will you trust those eyewitnesses? Will you hear and believe?